12 minutes after the hour, and President Obama is asking his top security and defense officials to give him options for going after ISIS in Syria.
He says it's too soon to say right now what steps the U.S. will take.
We will continue to consult with Congress, and I do think that it'll be important for Congress to weigh in, and or that our consultations with Congress continue to develop so that the American people are part of the debate. But I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet.
All right, it's that sentence that really got people talking. Retired Lieutenant General and CNN military analyst Mark Hertling joining us now, also former Homeland Security official and CNN national security analyst Juliette Kayyem. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to pose this question to both of you. General Hertling, we'll go to you first, but the president admitting there's no strategy yet for dealing with ISIS in Syria. One of the first things I thought of was, is Syria, or is ISIS listening to this, and will this embolden them? What do you say?
Well, when I first heard the statement, Christy, I knew exactly what the president was talking about, having received the kind of guidance he was discussing. When he was saying, we don't have a strategy yet, he has not picked his options. But yes, this is something that you don't want to publicize, but at the same time, you may want to keep ISIS on its toes. Which way is he going to go? I mean, maybe there's a question in their mind right now of what is the president going to do in Syria? They have already been confronted in Iraq. Now there's a potential of them being confronted in other places, and I think that may concern them.
Juliette?
Oh, I would agree with Mark wholeheartedly. I mean, we shouldn't make too much of a part of a sentence that President Obama said. It's clear we don't have a strategy because the options are still being considered. Military strikes in Syria are a game changer. No matter how much interventionists want to sort of say, well, the borders are loose up there and it doesn't really matter if we go from Iraq to Syria. President Assad of Syria believes that they are his borders. He believes in his borders, and he has said that he would view this as a sort of violation of his sovereignty. So these are high stakes, not just for the United States, but for all the allies. So deliberation is not a bad thing, given what could result from increasing our military mission in the area.
So let's talk about one of the allies and a different approach, some say. President Obama, we heard from him on Thursday, said there's no strategy yet for dealing with ISIS in Syria. Then one day later, just yesterday, British Prime Minister David Cameron spoke, and he offered a very different approach, much more forceful, some are saying, and he laid out a few steps. Let's play part of what Mr. Cameron said, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
We need to tackle that ideology of Islamist extremism head on, at root, before it takes the form of violence and terror. That means challenging the thinking of extremist ideologues, identifying the groups in this country that push an extremist agenda, and countering them by empowering the overwhelming majority who believe in British values of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for minorities.
General, I don't hear anything there that the White House has not already said, essentially, but it is a different approach. The appearance matters, optics matter. What do you make of the different approach by Mr. Cameron and the president?
Well, Victor, I'll say two things. First of all of the European countries, I think Mr. Cameron expressed the concerns of the UK, but having just returned from Europe in my last assignment before retiring, I will tell you all of the European countries are very concerned about their homeland security, to use that phrase. There are a lot of disenfranchised groups throughout Europe, much more so than in the United States, and they're very concerned about the flow of Islamic jihadists from the area into Europe. The second thing is Mr. Cameron's speaking with a very forceful leadership style, but he's not the one that's going to lead the action. President Obama is. So he has to really have his options very clear to bring in the allies, to help them exchange intelligence and perhaps build a force which is confronting this horrific threat.
Juliette, we know that the White House press secretary yesterday came out and said that the reason that the president stated this no strategy yet was in part, I believe, unless I have this incorrect, but I'm quite certain he said it was partly because the Pentagon is not completely ready, that the Pentagon has not laid out their plan. Then you've got the press secretary from the Pentagon coming out and saying, no, if anybody knows the U.S. military, they know we're ready. Is there a disconnect within the ranks there?
Well, there has been some disconnect, I would say, between the Pentagon and the White House just in terms of the language being used about the threat to the United States homeland. But I don't think there's a huge gap. Look, there is a military option to bomb in Syria. We would lead it, as the general said, so we need to make sure that we have everything in place. We don't have a coalition of the willing. We have a coalition of the unwilling, whether it's Turkey or Iraq or Saudi Arabia or even Russia. These are nations that want to see what we do first. And so I don't think that there's a gap. There is a military option. The White House has to consider more than the military option, has to consider diplomatic, our ties with our allies, the ties with the coalition of the unwilling, to see what's best for everyone, and so and what the strategy would result in. Look, we can start bombing in Syria. No one should believe that's the end of ISIS. They're just going to move again. And so what David Cameron was essentially saying was, military is just one piece of it. We have a long-term need to address radicalism, to address what's going on in Iraq and, of course, in Syria, and those are all part of the pieces.
All righty, General Mark Hertling and Juliette Kayyem, thank you both so much for being with us this morning. And we're going to continue, obviously, to talk.